Welcome to this event. My name is Peter, and I will be talking about OKRs and the new offering called Viva Goals. I have prepared a little agenda for us, initially just setting the scene for who I am and what the company I work for do, but then also introducing you to OKRs for those that are not familiar with it, and also the product called Viva Goals. And that, of course, brings me to showing you some live demonstrations of how the user experience is, how you can use it, and also how the administrators can configure it, or at least basically just touch upon how to do that. Also a little checklist on how you can get started, and a few comments on the integration story as well. So initially, this is me. I've been doing Microsoft consulting for 19 years, focused only on project portfolio management, and you could say in the recent 3 years, more or less, focused also on the OKR strategy way of doing things. That became extremely relevant when people were starting to work remote. I'll get back to that later. But also when we saw more and more companies doing product management and not just project management. So all these agile teams typically that are scaled up, that suddenly needs to be connected back to some sort of overall direction or theme or strategy. And that's where OKR is a nice fit. So lots of experience for me that I would like to share through this event. The company, Projectum, I was part of founding that 19 years ago. And the vision is making companies achieve their goals. So essentially you could translate that into that we have strategy and you want to execute that through projects or through other initiatives of some sort and make sure that you reach the end goal. The way we do it is very focused on bringing good vibes or good energy to the users. This means that project managers or people managers, anyone actually using our technology or Microsoft technology should feel motivated, energized, and just feel good when they use the technology or the tools. That's not always an easy ambition to have, but that's still our mission to make sure that's always the case. We have our own products for the Microsoft Power Platform, and we also have, of course, consulting services and 30 plus partners globally who help us in other regions and time zones. So Microsoft did a study just a few months ago about hybrid work and are we doing it right? I think hybrid is a word right now that's pretty broadly used. Some will use it in the context of a hybrid workplace where you work at the office or remote, and that becomes sort of a hybrid scenario. Others will use it for defining the way you work. So that could be a hybrid portfolio consisting of traditional projects, waterfall and so forth, and then agile ways of doing things with sprints, backlogs, and so on. So that's also hybrid, or at least the mix of those two are. But in this case, it's more around the whole culture and strategy discussion. And this study is publicly available, so I can definitely recommend reading it. So the first thing that I think is relevant to mention here is that 87% of employees reported that they are productive at work. So 87% feel they are very productive. And then we have 12% only of the leaders that say they have full confidence that their teams are productive. So that's obviously a conflict in some sense. And maybe the reason here is that there's a lack of transparency in what people are doing from a management perspective. And also down here as an employee, are we fully aware of when we are doing the right thing? Are management telling us the priorities, or do we have to guess them? More on that later, of course. And then also down here, we have 74% of people managers who are saying that they need guidance on how to prioritize their own work and therefore also the teams that they manage to increase performance. And we have 80% that say that they would personally benefit from more clarity. And again, back to the priorities. So it's all about clarity. It's all about prioritization so that not everything is equally relevant. I think that's a big thing right now, and especially when we're not sitting together, all of us in the office every day. So in a nutshell, you could say that in this case, OKR is about aligning people and initiatives or projects to these strategic priorities, once you have them, which means setting clear goals that are tangible. And essentially, that would lead to empowering people and teams to do better and more together, faster even, and at least making sure that they do the right thing. So that was sort of setting the scene for the basics. So now I'm going to try and go a little bit deeper into the definition of good-looking OKRs. if we just quickly try to do like a formula on what is a good OKR, it's essentially explaining that we will, and then an objective that could be conquer the world, as measured by, let's say, count of countries conquered, which is tangible. And we'll do that by, and then having certain initiatives or projects supporting that. So it's a lot about coming up with these big, ambitious definitions of where we want to be, perhaps many years from now or next year. And then also making sure that when we celebrate getting there, we know exactly why, and that why becomes the key results. And of course, this also are the resources we will associate with executing that strategy. So that's the basic formula. If we look at it from a more, I would say, traditional perspective, often you will see that you have objectives defined like this. So amazing revenue growth or best-in-class user experience, which is something that everyone should feel very motivated achieving if they can achieve it. It's a stretch typically, and you can almost sort of compare it to a vision, which means you're not sure exactly when you're there. But to get more specific on when you're there, we use the key results down here to make it tangible. And it doesn't have to be money or progress. It could be 40 new customers in a certain region, or closing that 1 million euros in new deals, or getting better user satisfaction. But it could also be a drop, for instance, reducing amount of complaints you get every week, or tickets every month, and so forth. And then to achieve all of this, we will launch these initiatives or projects, and they will come with a cost, obviously. But this cost, of course, should be less than the benefits that you are going to get out of doing the key results. So this way of doing sort of a strategic way of setting benefits and then having projects afterwards with cost is also changing a little bit the way we do business case management and benefit realization today. And especially compared to that, in the past, almost all benefit realization plans were sort of up to the project manager or the person approving the project to track. In this case, benefits are part of the, I would say, executive team or the strategic team who have defined the strategy and the targets. So not just the project manager. When we define objectives, typically we shouldn't have more than 5. They should be untangible or intangible, so no metrics. They should be ambitious. We should be proud of achieving them. They will come with a start and finish date. And ideally, not that many words to describe what it is. Key results, on the other hand, is typically where you have 1, 2, or 3 attached to each of these objectives. This is where you need an owner that takes full ownership of that key result and the tracking of it. You also need to define the metric you're going to use to track it. And of course, you need to know the baseline. So if you want to have 10% growth in your customers next year, then obviously you need to know how many customers you have today. It sounds easy, but quite often it's not the case that it's that easy to bring out those numbers. So that's a crucial part of setting up OKRs to get the baseline values at the beginning. Once we have then the baseline and the target, we can then begin to track it bi-weekly, every month, or weekly, depending on how you do it. To achieve the goals or the key results, we need then the initiatives or the projects. And of course, that's more like a traditional project or product that you're going to produce, or feature perhaps. But essentially, you need someone who's in charge of it, start, finish, dates, progress, are things going well or not? So some sort of status indicator, and a link to obviously the key result up here. So that's sort of the essence of how you define and work with OKRs. Then importantly to mention as well is that KPIs is not the same as OKRs. So KPIs are typically used for tracking lots of things, very important things. And in this case, it's a simple scenario where you say, we would like to not have more than 1% sick days annually across the entire company. And to figure out if that's the case or not, we will use timesheeting and track if people are on work, if they're sick, and so forth. Now that's not something out of the ordinary. This is not something that's an OKR, and the reason is that chances are you would not like to have a high percentage of sick days ever in your company. It's a thing you will always like to be certain is as low as possible. It's sort of what we can call like a maintenance factor or maintenance KPI. Important, but still maintenance. If in fact your sick days had exploded to being above 20%, then we could discuss if it's an OKR, because now it's out of the ordinary. We have to do something next year that is completely different than what we normally do. But if there's nothing wrong and things are going great, it's great to track that KPI, but it's not an OKR. So OKR could be that you want to move into this APAC region, and you want to have a certain amount of new customers in that region by the end of a certain year, in this case 2022. And to do that, you want to perhaps execute 3, perhaps also costly campaigns in the year before that, to sort of warm up and create awareness around why we're moving into APAC. But essentially, this is the difference between like unique strategic elements and I would say maintenance KPIs, which is also important, but a different bucket. Then we also have the other aspect of it for those who are used to project portfolio management. For the last almost like 19 years in my case, we've heard about business drivers. Business drivers, business drivers, business drivers. And these are typically like 5 to 10 drivers, or maybe even more simple, run, grow, transform, or similar. And business drivers, if I just expand here, are typically these intangible statements like happier customers, without really defining what that means. So in that case, anyone with a project or a proposal or an idea can bottom up link their idea or project to a driver. And because it's intangible, it's often the project manager who then has to define how much you actually believe you can increase a revenue. And therefore you do a business case with cost and benefits, and you can do the math and then get the ROI and make it comparable to other projects or ideas. So that's the driver idea for most companies that I work with. But on the other side, you have OKRs. So in this case, you don't see projects randomly created and randomly connected ad hoc to your, let's say, objectives and key results. So this is more structured, and that's why I'm writing top down. Because before you launch the projects, you launch the strategy and you know where you're heading and when you are there where you want to be. Once you know that, that's your objectives and key results, then you can start to create or give birth to these projects or initiatives or ideas that are needed to get there, or at least what you think is needed to get there. Which means that once you approve the strategy, you also approve the cost of running that strategy, which essentially would be your projects. So it's a big difference between bottom-up prioritizing and top-down, like predefined, important before they arrive in the project portfolio. So for the next sort of few minutes, I'll talk a little bit about how this relates back to project portfolio management, but in a more sort of detailed landscape. So as you can see here on my slide, just a second before it loads there, if we look at things in a very basic way right now, because it's difficult times defining what is in fact a PMO or PPM, or is it really PPM or is it strategy portfolio management? So SPM, there's lots of abbreviations right now. But the way I like to describe it is that at the bottom here, we have traditional and very agile-led initiatives or projects or teams or products or whatever. Down here, we have teams working together to produce work in the same direction, hopefully as well. Now, this type of work, regardless of it being agilely executed or waterfall traditional, will be rolled up to some sort of a portfolio or bucket so that management can look across and see what is IT doing, what is R&D doing, are they doing stuff together, what's the cost, what was the budget, and so forth. And if we look at what people are asked to explain and report on at this level up here, typically there's no difference whether or not it's agile or not, because it's typically these sort of boxes you see here. Let me zoom in a little bit. But it's typically something around strategy, financial forecasting, timelines, risks and issues, governance, ranking, reports, stakeholders, change requests, etc. So these boxes are typically the same requirements. And it's also how Projectum, so my company here, have been developing our products for the Microsoft Power Platform. And essentially just making sure that through certain products we offer, one is Power PPM and Power Hub and so forth, through these applications, you can get started extremely fast doing these things that you see up here, because these are disciplines or capabilities that almost any project portfolio management department or maybe an entire company is in need of typically. So that's how we see things. And up here in this box is obviously where it says strategy and OKR. And we've had that offering in Microsoft Power Apps, this tool down here, for quite some years now. And of course, because of Viva Goals right now, we see that maybe we now have sort of an upgrade experience because of this tool. so that users can do even more than we were able to offer with what we had in our Power PPM and Power Apps offering. And that's why Viva Goals is today's topic for my event, and why it also matters to me, because it is a way to improve project portfolio management, which is my niche and will continue to be my niche. So first and foremost, Viva Goals can be acquired by buying a license in the Microsoft license store. Your admins can typically do that. And it costs $6 per user per month. You can also buy it by buying other Viva products, but if you only buy Viva Goals, this is the cost. And I'm not going to read up what it does, because we've sort of been through right now, at least setting the scene for what OKRs are, why we do it. But this is the interface, and as you can see, it will sort of look pretty modern. It works in Teams, it works in the browser, it works on your phone, but more on that when I give the demo, of course. But that's the Viva Goals offering. So for the next couple of minutes here, I'm just going to explain a little bit around the different layers. So I think initially we have connecting purpose to strategy. And that's also important, because strategy is not the only thing that you do at the top level. There can also be other, value-driven decisions, cultural decisions that are sometimes defined prior to defining the strategy. Typically, that's a boardroom discussion as well. So we have purpose defined at the very top with mission, values and culture, and strategic priorities. And then we have strategy, which is a mix of these strategic priorities and the objectives that we want to establish. And then you have the execution part, which again is a mix of objectives, key results, and initiatives. And it's often here we see that there's a decoupling of these different levels, at least from a technology standpoint. Quite often, most of what you see at the very top here, perhaps worst case all the way through to key results, is a PowerPoint exercise, annually, quarterly, and everyone gets a copy of it, the PowerPoint, and then it's not really data-driven, then you do what you usually do in your project management tool or different agile tools. So this is all about making sure that these different layers are connected with data so that we can snapshot, track, predict, and do much more smart decisions based on that data that has to do with the total company health, not just the project progress tracking, but the strategy progress tracking, and actually the strategy compared to also the cultural aspect or the values. So today is just me talking about how OKRs relates to projects and programs and tasks or goals. But OKRs is also about me as an individual, perhaps having quarterly reviews with my manager where we can discuss if I'm achieving my OKRs, my personal OKRs. But that's more or less a different topic or a different webinar almost that has to include HR and talent management and these things. But just to make sure that everyone is on board, that it's sort of two things, OKRs. It's for project portfolio execution and strategy execution, and it's for the employee experience that has to do with, do I know exactly what's my, what's expected from me and so forth. Great. So now let's go live and see how the tool actually looks like in real time. Now let's start off by opening up my browser here, which will take me to the landing page or my personal landing page for Viva Goals, which you can find at goals.microsoft.com. It's also the same address you can use to spin up a trial if you want to. And trials comes for free for I think it's around 30 days or something like that. Once you're into the tool, you will again arrive here, my OKRs. These are all the things that it's relevant to me. So if you sort of collapse this, you'll find that you have corporate-wide OKRs, you could have business unit or OKRs, or team OKRs, or individual OKRs that are only relevant to me as a person and perhaps my personal development. So it's a mix of many things, and it can be collapsed as well like this if you have a lot of things to look at. This is the overall progress, showing you that if everything was linear distributed, you would have to do it like this, and before end of year, in this case, end of December, you should be at 100%. And whether or not we are there is a matter of looking at what's on track, what's behind, and so forth, which is why I can expand down here and see only the things that's relevant to me. And in this case, there's a Projectum, so company-wide OKR that I'm leading, where we are at risk because we are 46% complete, which is not enough compared to where we should be. And below here, I could also see that besides this objective, I have these key results. So I'm actually in charge of monitoring the increase in monthly website visitors by 10%. And to update these numbers, I'll get back to that later, but that can be simply dragging and dropping here, like this. Or it could be that you go in and click on this button, which means check in. So it's a process for how you do it. Then you write the new number and you hit check in. It could also be that you connect this to another place where you have the data, a CRM system, an Excel report, a SQL database, or whatever it is that can actually just automatically pull the current status so you don't have to update it. That's where it's a cool application, Viva Goals, because it actually comes with lots of great connectors to Microsoft for sure, but also non-Microsoft technology providers. So this is the my OKR view. We also have my teams. This would be the view on the sort of the team-based OKRs. Here you have, for instance, the higher level being Denmark, and Denmark is then connected to the worldwide corporate setting. So as you can see, these sort of objectives and key results for a full country could then be connected up to the global OKRs. And then you have below this business unit of Denmark, you could then have HR, or you could have IT down here, or other departments driving things. That's also why you can see here the structure that BU Denmark is still the one I'm looking at, but only for, in this case, HR, or it could be business unit Denmark, IT, and so forth. And there's, of course, security aspects here so that you can only see the department you are leading, or your team, or you as a person, depending on your security setup. So that's how it works. Now, to sort of get started and give some structure in how it works on a daily basis, I'm actually going to start with the admin button for the admins. Because what is great about this tool is the simplicity of how you configure it. First of all, the whole settings and adding people to use it is fairly simple. You just add users, you give them a role. You could do it manually or by integrating it to, for instance, your Active Directory, but essentially you just add them by typing their name and you give them a role. Then you have the teams that can be connected to this. And in this case, you saw before I have the business unit of Denmark, and then I have the different departments within Denmark. So that's the structure. And I could easily create a new team if I wanted to, which could then be our sales team, where, for instance, I'm the owner of that one. And I can say, some small stuff like this is our commercial department or whatever sort of other text you want to add. And the parent of this sales team is the business unit of Denmark, for instance, or something else. But there could also be a direct link back to the corporate level. I'm going to add this one, which gives me this new bucket down here. So if I go back to the My Teams overview, I can now see HR, IT, R&D, and sales. So if you open up sales, you'll see that the box is empty. There's nothing there. And one thing that's unique about Viva Goals, I believe, is the amount of help you get embedded directly in the application to avoid having to read heavy manuals, configuration guides, and these things. So even if you have nothing, you can actually start with something by clicking here, and you'll get defined or predefined examples of OKRs for company-wide OKRs, sales OKRs, marketing, finance, customer success, and so forth. Then you can take all of these by simply just clicking Add, and the full structure will be inserted, and you can then take it from there. So actually, it's great to have something that can get you started quickly. Besides that, I'm going to do it from the ground up. We can look at a current quarter or an annual perspective, because we have configured sort of the timeline of how we want to track our OKRs and define the goals. And I'm using quarters and I'm using years as well. But it could be bi-weekly or weekly or half year and so forth. Now, next up, let's add an objective. So if I click here, you'll see the right-hand side opening up, and I can then write my super objective, or let's write winning in APAC, for instance. And this is still a team type objective because it's created within a team. It's in the context of the sales team, and we want to win in APAC before end of this year. So that's very soon, but that could be the case. You could also just change it to a full year or just going to a specific date. But let's just keep it here for now. We need to get to 100%, and then we'll get back to what that means, because that's, of course, nothing that makes sense at all on this level. And that's why we need the key results. So let's just start by saving this or creating this, which is now the container for whatever has to be measured underneath this header. So next up, we click on this button, and we can now add a key result. So this is where we have to be tangible. So let's say we want to win 10 new customers. in APAC again, but also in 2022. So before end of year. So again, back to the formula of OKR. What is it you want to measure? How do you want to measure it? And by when do you want to be done with this goal that you have? So I can click create now. So now we have two things. We have the objective and we have the goal. So again, you could also see this in more like a visual inspired chart. But if I click here, you can click and see the breakdown from objectives from the sales team in 22. Winning in APAC is the objective. It's not started and so forth. If I click here, I then see what goes on below it. So if you had more than one, you'll see all of them lining up nicely down here. So it's a nice view that I think quite often has not been available in most tools that does this. So great view. Now back to the next level. So if you want to connect this to projects, you could connect it by connecting it to an existing project in another tool, Power BPM or data in a report, or etc. You could also, because this is as an event or webinar around Viva Goals mainly. So let me show you that you can also click here and write new, but add project. So you could actually do a project XYZ. Again, it's a team project, it's in sales, it's the owner, and so forth. And the outcome in this case, because it's a project, then typically it's measured by % completion. But it could actually be something else that's defined by the person creating it. But let's park that for now and just hit save. So now we have objectives, key results, and initiatives. So the typical structure you'll find. And again, if this one is updated, that could be done by hand like this and say check in. And now it's 46%. It could also be that this one comes from some tasks that you've created, but it's very basic what you can do in this tool when it comes to tasks. And that's why we offer Power PPM as the connector to your more project mature way of doing things in your project portfolio management system. But you could go in to click outcome and add tasks. So essentially you could have tasks in Viva Goals. So you have task 1, and then that's task 2. There we go. And task 3, like this. You could add a due date to it. This has to be done by end of next week. Because it's before end of year, it's 22nd. And actually this is in the middle of between Christmas and New Year's. This is the 29th. And I will own this one. So again, we can assign a person. So it's pretty basic stuff. And that's sort of it. And then you can have progress, which comes automatically from completed tasks, or you override it by yourself typing in % completion. Let's try and hit save now. So once we've done that, that actually means that if we again open up the project quickly, underneath the task level down here, we can then go in, if we can find it, there we go, and mark these as complete. But it might take a few seconds before the marking complete is available. Don't know why, but that's the way it is right now in Viva Goals. So we'll show it later in the presentation. But finally here, if you don't want to use tasks and marking things as done, you could also connect it to the data source. Let's try and do that quickly. And that means that if you click on this one, you'll see all the different connectors you have allowed as an admin inside your organization. I have only allowed for Excel and Azure DevOps right now. And if you click on this one, you can then see that it takes you to the DevOps connector or whatever connector you want to use, where you find a query, and then you can track progress by pulling that information automatically. So again, there's a lot of things you can do. Well, for once, you can add and manage tasks directly in Viva Goals. That might not be sufficient for most, especially in a project portfolio context. And there you will probably connect them to Dataverse, Power Apps, Dynamics, Power PPM, whatever you sort of have in that library. And that brings me to the connectors. So quickly back to the admin area. If I click admin here, you will find that you have integrations there. These need to be activated by you or by the admin. They are not just available for anyone. So if you enable it, they will be available and work. If you don't enable it, they can't be used. So that's an admin experience. Here you can see what is currently supported and that I have enabled Azure DevOps and Excel online. And this is where you will find much more connectors coming out soon, especially that has to do with Microsoft internally and their own products. So Dynamics, Power Apps, Microsoft Project, and so on. So lots of more stuff coming here, but not exactly when they will come, but hopefully, let's say early next year, we'll see. Going back up here and back to our teams. Here we go, my team, back to the sales team. So now that we have this project down here, let's just quickly say that it's 78% done and hit a check-in. That's great. Project 78% done. That's fine. And we can also see when it was done, and there's a logging for when it was updated and how often and so on. But it's not impacting whatsoever the key result. This can be configured so it does impact the key result, but my recommendation is that it doesn't. Executing projects quite often has nothing to do with capturing benefits or measuring if new customers have landed in our sales system or similar. So typically the key result is where you want to do an update yourself or by pulling in data from another system. I could also that would not be a project management tool, but it would probably be an ERP system or CRM or wherever else you have your data. But this one also needs updating, and it's the same approach as before. You can click here, for instance, check in, and then it shows you where we need to go. In this case, it's 10 new customers in APAC. It's measured as percentages. That might not be the right way to do it. Let me just do it quickly just for the ease of it. Say we are 100% done. Yep. And then we can just hit check in. Once we do that, this key result has been achieved. You can see it here ahead of time. That's why it says early. And the objective overall has also been completed. But if you add another key result underneath the objective, let's do that quickly. I'm going to write the same thing, 10 new customers, in Australia in 2022. So if we do this differently than before, let's imagine now we're not going to use percent completion. We're going to add our own metric, which is what I recommend people to do. And ideally, we have something called increase from and to, because we need to know the baseline and where to get to. So this could be the case where we know that in Australia right now, we might have 3 customers, but we need to get to 10 new, so that is actually 13. So that's the amount of customers that we have. So it's customers we are measuring, count of customers, from 3 to 13. So if we click create on that one, we have redefined the way we track the key result from being percent completion with the original one to now being customers. It even says it here, where start is 3, target is 13. And then when you do a check-in now, you will not check in on progress per percent. You will check in on amount of customers that you have. So if you have 7 right now and hit check-in, it will then convert that to percentages and then tell you that that means you're now 40% done. And then 40 plus 100 divided by 2 equals 70. That's why we're now 70% done with the overall objective. So that was the quick intro to how this works. But there are so many ways to reconfigure how things should be updated. If it should inherit things, if it should, like in this case, it shows here, if it should or should not contribute to the parent progress. And that's why this is where you need to be very specific when you configure the system on how you want your organization to work, not how Viva Goals does it, because Viva Goals can more or less support any way of working, in this case with OKRs. So it's up to how you want to work or how you're used to working. Let's try again now and click on the view chart here, because now we've done more than we had before. We now have still winning in APAC as a Q4 22 objective. We can see it's 70% done. We can also see that it's 100% done when it comes to new customers in APAC. And we can see we're 40% done with what goes on in Australia. And if we click here, we can also see the project below it as well, if we want to. So all of this is different visuals that are sometimes great to use. Sometimes you don't want this view, and maybe you want something that looks a little bit more like a spreadsheet, which could be this one. You can trim the view as well, doing it flat list, don't show too much details and so on. You could also go to the main view here and use the Explorer, all objectives, for instance, where you see everything that you have configured. And when I say configured, it's because we have filtering up here. You can add your own filter and use whatever field you have available in the system to just get your data that you want. Then you can change how the view looks as well. You can group by certain owners or group by whatever you want. And then you can also sort by priority, progress, start date. And essentially, you can actually export that. And by export, it means exporting to Excel. The way that works is that you click export, you select what you want and the type of file you want. That could be Excel, with or without the children of these that you're looking at. And then when you hit export, it won't show the Excel file initially. as in other tools, but it will come as an email saying you're now ready to get your data, and then you open up the attached Excel file. So it's a little bit different, that experience, but it works. You can also save views, so it's your own views for the next time, and make them available to the rest of the company, so it's not just yours. So that's essentially how the admin would be doing views for the system. Now, back again to the main page here. So what I've shown so far is the basics of doing teams, objectives, key results, even projects, and also where to activate the integration. The update, of course, is something you can do on the go. You can also do it through your phone. It actually trims it quite well if you open it up on a mobile device or on an iPad or tablet of some sort. But you should also know that all of this, so Viva Goals, also works directly inside Teams. And in here, it's actually its own app. So right now I have it right here called Viva Goals. But if you need to find it, you just go here and you write Viva or Goals. And then you will find it next to other Viva modules. And you can add it in, right-click it, and then pin it. And once you've done that, it will always be in Teams, which means when I click here, I'm brought to the organizational OKRs overview initially. Just a second. So here's my OKRs for Projectum as a company. And I can again expand and see what goes on below and so forth. I can also click on projects on the Projectum corporate level. But I can also go to my OKRs. And that's typically where you will find the details that's more relevant to you. So everything where I'm tagged as the owner. Doesn't matter if it's a project or a team or key result or an objective. Everything where I am. So this is my view. And then you can quickly filter on a time period to see what's going on in just that time span. And you can again group, view the chart, and even do the updates from here. So there's a really good experience using Microsoft Teams for Viva Goals instead of having to point people to a separate website somewhere. So this works quite well. And I think this is the essence of what Viva Goals is right now. And also, of course, the connectors you saw. Obviously, again, I'm looking forward to more connectors that will make it easier for us, at least, as a project portfolio management company to integrate with whatever tool people prefer to use for tracking tasks and projects in. So there's a few missing connectors there. But besides that, it really works. It's been deployed quite a few times by us, even in Denmark and also abroad. So it does work, and it's a tool that's been around for quite a while, even before Microsoft acquired it. So it's not a first version of anything. It's a proven version used by thousands of people every day. So just to finalize this presentation, I'm going to go back into this deck. And yeah, we have been live now, so that's great. Deployment steps. So I try to just quickly capture a very simple view on what is it that you can do to try it out or get it up and running, maybe even yourselves, to be honest. So initially, you go to goals.microsoft.com. If you have not been there before, you will be asked for a preview or a license because you probably don't have it. And you will automatically be given that pool of licenses. Essentially, these licenses you will get 50 of, and they will be available afterwards in the Office 365 Admin Center. So that requires either that you are an admin or someone else to go in and give you that license. But then you can go per user and say this person needs a license to Viva, and then it works. Once you've done that, you enter in the goals.microsoft.com address again. But now it's looking like I just showed you before, except there will be no OKRs initially. And the way I typically go through the guidelines, because there's a lot of things you can read up on, it's very well documented. I'll share the links later, but these steps are typically what's most relevant to understand. First, you define the OKR structure that goes on in the admin area. You set up the teams, you add the users, you define the time reporting and how often you expect people to update numbers. After that, it's a matter of taking your strategy and put it into play. So do you have those objectives? Do you have those key results? And making sure or validating that they are in the right form and shape. Are they in fact tangible, your results? Do we have more than just % completion and these things? When you have that, it's a matter of connecting it to the execution part, either by adding these sort of lightweight projects, as you saw before in Viva Goals, or by connecting it to another tool that you use for the more detailed planning and execution. Then you define % completion. And I would say at the end of the day, you then create views that makes it easier for the end users to find their items or export to Excel or do some reports somewhere else in the business. And of course, it's a matter of training sometimes. So training is a part of this, but I wouldn't say training in Viva Goals doesn't have to be that much. It's very much self-explanatory. And even if it's not the case, then I can only recommend to use the native guide, just a second, these quick start guides that are embedded in the tool itself. So if you click on these things, you will learn how to do things with a guided tour by Microsoft. So I would say that's enough for many people to get started. But it's more a matter of being trained in how the company want to work with OKRs. I think that's the training you need. And how does good OKRs look like in your company, not in another person's company? I think that's crucial to get that defined. And besides that, on a final note, the Viva Goals training in more details can be accessed in this link. We'll share the links afterwards. It's self-paced, but it's actually lots of modules that you can take one at a time and even get your nice badge when you're done. This is how it looks down here. You have some modules. You have the Viva Goals deployment guide, which is, again, very well-defined an implementation guide, also including change management, how to get your ambassadors and sponsors and all these things, how to run a pilot and so forth. So that's another book worth reading, or not a book, but a lightweight book at least, a white paper. And then there's the link to our website if you want to know more, or you want to learn more with us or from us on how we've done it before, or maybe how you can connect this to your project portfolio management tool. But that's all I had to share for this event. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll have great success and fun with the Viva Goals. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if we can do anything to help you out. Thank you.